Well, Charles Fillmore talked about will, and that's the power for this month. And I'd like to look at another aspect of will. I don't know, well, I'm the first speaker, so I don't guess anyone's looked at any aspect of will. I'd like to look at the collective will as opposed to the individual will. So much of us look at ideas like motivation, success, and so forth, and it's like, well, what about me? Because in the day-to-day potential suffering and misery that we might have when we're faced with any number of problems or situations, we think, what about me? And it's really not so easy to move from those conundrums as we would like for it to be, but yet there is a collective will that's always operating, even if our minds are closed due to current situations. Have you ever had an event that allowed you to change? Most common is probably the event of illness. People often have an event of illness and they say, I'm not going to do this, I'm not going to do that, I'm going to exercise more, I'm going to do whatever it is that you think it's going to do that's going to free you. But it was the event of the illness that gave you the will to change directions. Or perhaps you're in a relationship and something happened in that relationship and it's like, that's it. This is the bottom line. I can't stay in this relationship anymore. The event gave you the will to go a different way in the relationship, whether it was get marriage counseling, say, but you're gone, give an ultimatum, if you drink anymore, I'm gone, whatever it was. The event gave you the will. And so that brings to question the whole idea of personal will and the value and benefit it has for us, because I'm just going to propose and I'm going to say and think that more often than not, that it's something that is bigger than our limited perception that gives us the will to do what it is that we need to do. Even though we talk so much about freedom and individual will, I'm looking today at the value of collective will. To me, it seems like the individual will is often too small. It's too small for our good. It doesn't have the vision that it needs. Because usually the reason we're limited is because there's some kind of an upset and we're trying to fix it. So we got to have the will to overcome it. Well, what kind of straight perspective is that if we're operating from some kind of dilemma? I just got in last night from visiting my two identical grandsons. They're identical twins, and they were born prematurely in May, and they weighed 3-some pounds, and now they're 7 pounds. And they were the perfect storm of everything that could be wrong with twins. I didn't know that so many things could happen to twins, but they had 4 life-threatening situations that happened. Some of them were ongoing through the last part of the pregnancy, and they finally were born and hooked up to all kinds of monitors and isolates and so forth. But finally they're home, and I went to not only visit but to help take care of them. If you are on the outside of that home and you're looking in, you're thinking the twins rule, because when they cry, they get fed. When they're wet, they get their diapers changed. Everything is operating around the twins. But if we really look at a larger perspective of what's happening with the twins, they're not having free will. It's not their will is ruling, because without their parents feeding them, without their parents changing their diapers, without their parents paying the bills, nothing's happening. Their free will is at the behest of a larger source, their parents. And our free will is at the behest of a larger source than our limited thinking. It's just like the ocean. If you look at a wave in the ocean can take so many shapes. I mean, some of them are, like I guess a tsunami is like a huge wave. Like they talked about the one, it was 35 feet tall, the wave count that came into to Bay St. Louis, Mississippi during Katrina. And then there are some waves that people surf on. Have you ever seen some of those surfers that surf actually inside the wave? The wave is so big that they go right through the wave, and it's going all the way over here. And then there are these little old bitty waves. I mean, you've probably been swimming in Galveston, and there are these tiny little waves, and you're waiting for a wave that you can go in and body surf. And so we're thinking that there's this individual consciousness of the wave, like here's a good wave, here's a bad wave, here's a tall wave, a big wave, an imposing wave, all kinds of waves. But actually, those waves are nothing. They don't have any individualness to them except for what we give to them because they're connected to the ocean. It's the ocean's doing everything. There are underground currents and everything. The ocean's doing all this stuff to them. There's no really waves. That's just the way we call something and almost separate it out from its source. And will is like that. It really can't be separate from the source. If you take matter and you divide it up into its smallest components, if you look at it in an electron microscope, the electron microscope is like the Hubble microscope, telescope. If you look at the Hubble telescope and look out, you can see out infinitely. You can see all kinds of galaxies and things out in outer space. But if you look at an electron microscope, you can go in infinitely, and you see the tiniest things. And what scientists can see when they look at that those particles is that when they move. It is not just an individual decision that this boson will take to move. It's going to move. It's interrelated with everything around it. It's not just, okay, today I think I'm going to take a hop. It's this something in a field of consciousness that allows it to move, or maybe that it has only the will to move within this highest plan, and that's how it moves. It doesn't individually make a decision to move. And people talk about God's will, and when people talk about God's will, I never like that. Oh. Microscope going down. Let's see, maybe if I go like this. But I don't like it when people talk about God's will, because have you noticed that whenever wins the lottery and you say, wow, that was God's will, you won the lottery. No, they say, somebody gets killed, a 2-year-old gets killed in a car accident, they say, well, it was God's will. And it's like, I don't like the picture of God's will. Nobody ever says that about anything good. Have you noticed that? It's always some terrific bad thing that's happening. And I don't want anybody, if I have something bad happen to me, come over and tell me it's God's will. I'm going to bonk them on the head. So it's like it's not God's will. And if people talk about starving kids and it's God's will, and I say, are you kidding me? It's not God's will. There's plenty of food. Somebody could get fed. This has not anything to do with God's will. So in terms of will, I don't even want to discuss the limited view that most people have of God's will, because it's basically an ego-based, ridiculous assumption as far as I'm concerned. The Course in Miracles actually talks about the journey of the soul, and it says that at first we discover the truth, and then we get really excited about it, and we use it in our lives, and things work out really well. And we have a period of rest. But that period of rest is only because of the tough things that we will go through after this period of rest, that we need this respite or this quiet time, because the stuff is going to hit the fan. It's going to, life is going to fall apart. And the reason that it's going to fall apart is we're going to find out that everything that we willed and that we wanted will not bring us the contentment, the satisfaction, and self-realization that we want. Because the individual will, which the ego will, is not going to bring it, because we don't have the wisdom in our limited perspective to know what it is that we need for satisfaction. And when I say satisfaction, I mean self-realization. I mean contentment. I mean something that when I get up in the morning, that my mind is not thinking, what can I do to make it better? I don't want to make, if things are already good, there doesn't have to be a plan to make it better. I would rather be at the thing where I accept and receive and perceive all the good that's present now than this plan that will keep me just endlessly trying to do and figure and finagle life to make it better. That's the plan of success. And I was kind of laughing when you read that success, and I'm glad that they talked about spiritual success in the Daily Word. However, that word to me, success, is almost an indictment, because it keeps people running ragged to meet this impossible dream that we'll never get to. Because whatever it is that we think the success is, it's never the right kind, it's never enough. because it's something that our individual personal will is planned, and it can't bring that satisfaction. And so without satisfaction, we're just going to hop on to the next thing to try to make it right. I just returned from a conference on spirituality and consciousness. Science and consciousness, science and consciousness. And one of the speakers, you may have heard of Amit Goswami, who's a quantum physicist. He was in What the Bleep. And he's just such a neat guy. And he talked about our will, and he talked about willpower, that we have willpower that we use constantly, especially when we're with other people. And it's because our willpower actually is radiating out around other people. And he suggests that rather than just have our unconscious willpower, which is the effect we have on other people by our energy, and what would it be if we had what he called will prayer? And that will prayer would be if you were sitting beside someone and you experienced unconditional love, and you radiated that consciously and allowed that into the field of consciousness rather than just be sitting beside someone with, well, what have I got to do this morning? Or, my arm is not in the right place. Why don't they move their foot? But just being really conscious and prayerful about this, impregnating love in the moment consciously. Will prayer. And also at the same conference I attended, this section for the Order of the Theosophical Society. It's the Order of Service. And so they told all about what we're doing around the world to serve different people. And she talked about the idea of personally serving. This is not a new idea, but it was just neat the way she put it. And she says, you don't have to do a big project to live your life in service. You can just do something very small. And she had read a book about doing 50 mitzvahs, which are good deeds, and I was talking, how can you do this in your life? And so that evening, we were all going on a bus over to a college to attend this speech. And I got everyone on the bus, and I had to deal with the bus driver. And the bus driver just was not very happy. He was frowning, kind of contrite, and gloomy. And too often it's easy to take that personally. Well, what's wrong with them, or who do they think they are? But yet my first thought was, oh great, I can do a personal mitzvah. I can do a personal service project. And so I went to everyone in the bus, and it was kind of tough riding, let me tell you, because I get a little seasick, but I went all through the bus and I said, our bus driver has forgotten who he is. So when you get off, would you personally thank him and maybe touch him gently and make him know how much you appreciate it? Very interesting. By the time I had gotten all the way to the end of the bus and returned to the front seat, Nate's whole demeanor had changed. He was smiling. He was okay. The will prayer had already worked before we had started the actual implementation of the prayer. As people walked off the bus, he got off the bus and helped everybody personally off. He smiled. He radiated. It was just amazing to see the change in him. And then the next night at this conference, we had a fun night. And I always love fun night, and people are jovial getting ready for fun night. And I was taking up money for people to go into for dinner. And I'd say that between the door that they entered the cafeteria and where I was sitting, there was about 30 feet. And as everybody walked up, I said, I had decided to do another personal service project. And as everybody walked up, and I said, well, the admission for dinner tonight is that you have to give me a hug, and I'm going to give you a hug. And so I hugged everybody personally before they came, and I said, but now here's the real part. I said, you're going into the magic kingdom, and it's over there. And I said, the way is straight and narrow, and you've got to hold my hand because you've never been there before, and we can only make it together. Don't look off the edges because they're so deep that if you fall off the side, you may go over to the dark side. So I held everybody's hand, and we would walk, and we would make it. And I said, and now when you get to the magic kingdom, you'll be free, and when you go in there, you'll be in such a wonderful space, and you've made it, but you're in danger until you get to the magic kingdom. So we all walked over and then stopped at the magic kingdom, and then they went in. And the timing was so wonderful because it was like I didn't have like 6 people waiting. It was like one person would come and we'd go into the magic kingdom and the next person would come. And it changed the whole air of what was going on. I mean, it just illuminated the whole event. It was magic. It was amazing. And it was my dharma. It was the way I could use my will prayer to influence. So the question I like to ask when I'm with somebody that's grumpy and not doing what I think they should be doing, not treating me the way they should treat me, not listening the way that I think they should listen, not doing to me the way they should, not acting in life the way I think they should, not living in life, not being positive, etc., the mind trip, is how much will it really cost me to love them right now in spite of what they're doing? How much will it cost me? What will I lose? Will I lose anything if I don't defend myself? I tried that out recently the other day. I was with someone and I noticed my mind was turning to the dark side. And there was something that he had said that was a little bit, I felt put down a little bit or afraid I wasn't doing the right thing. And it was just, I could go down that road. But how much will it cost me to love him? So I began to focus on that immanent presence of love that's always there, always unconditionally present, only to be perceived. And it felt so wonderful. And I thought, why would we ever choose anything else? Why would there ever be another choice? Why would the ego win? And when I say ego, I really mean the limited self that chooses things that are not good for us, that chooses drama, that chooses suffering. So how can we operate more from the collective will? What will speed our mind, our lives, and so forth in that direction? And one of the practices that I think is really cool is Vipassana. And Vipassana is the use of the mind and the spirit and being conscious of our bodily, what we're doing with our body and our body sensations, how our body's moving, walking, and so forth. And it quietens and calms our minds so that our field of consciousness becomes much more unlimited. Because it's the thinking mind that drives, when we have the logical thinking mind, it drives the mind here. And the mind here becomes very self-obsessed. But as we let go of that mind and we put less information in it and we let it think less, then the mind begins to expand. And that's when I say we enter this collective will when we let the mind expand. Because when we're here, it's all about me. And it's all about impossibilities. And it will never work out. That's what this mind is about right here. So I'd like to offer you EZosophy Vipassana. And EZosophy Vipassana, the mantra for that is just easier, freer, and lighter. And so if I were doing that physically right now, and I did that with my hand, I think I've done this with you before, but we're going to do it again, and that is just wave your hand. Just take one hand and wave it. Maybe wave your arm. Now the next thing I want you to do is try to wave your arm, a hand, an arm, and make it easier and freer and lighter. How would it be if you're making it easier to move, freer to move, and lighter to move? Easier, freer, and lighter. Now notice what happens to the consciousness when we do that, because when you go like this, we don't think about it too much, right? But as it gets easier and freer and lighter, for most of us, our attention went to the arm. Our consciousness went to focus and awareness. It was not as, this is almost an unconscious movement, and this is a conscious movement. And so I suggest with easier, freer, and lighter, that as we walk, and as we move, and as we breathe, that we keep that mantra in mind, whether we're breathing, like easier, freer, and lighter, because the breath is holding on to itself and it won't move, or whether the body is moving, or even when there's a mental problem, to look at that problem as a construct of the way we put sentences together and beliefs together, and how much of that problem and how much of that suffering is not just mixed, like in a recipe, that we have a recipe for suffering that we constantly have. Is there another recipe that we can apply at that time? Can we take that whole thing and unturn it and not make it into suffering, just like I was going to do when I was talking to myself about someone else, and I was able to say, what is the recipe for easiness? And that is, can I apply love right now? So can that happen right now? Because the open secret is that love is constantly, always available. And it is bigger than any problem that we can throw at it. It's bigger than any question, because in the presence of that love, the question disappears. It's gone. It's just gone. And so maybe the question we have to ask ourselves is, why wouldn't I want it to be easier? Why wouldn't I use this love? What is it to me that's so seductive about this pain and the suffering that I create in my life through my thoughts? Not put ourselves down. Oh, here I go again. I'm thinking negatively. It's like, what is it that's really going on here? To question myself and call myself lovingly into consciousness is, well, can I move into this love right now? So what I want you to understand in my perception, in my opinion, let's say my opinion is that our personal will is insignificant. There is a point in our lives that we grow our ego so that we know who we are and what we want. But then at some point we have to let that go. Because if we try to let it go before and we think that we're nothing, and we try to let that go, then we really can't let anything go. If you think you're nothing, you can't let it go. So we mature enough to know and understand and feel that we are something, and then it's like, but that is nothing, and let that go. And that's when we let go into the collective will. But people who turn their lives over to a higher power, to God, and they have no sense of who they are, they're often doing that because their parents did that or somebody else did it, and they're trying, they're just hoping there's something there, but there's no real connection. So once we get to that point that we can turn it over, our personal will is insignificant. And I'd like to close with the words of Dr. Eben Alexander. I was so excited that I got to hear him speak. He's the man that wrote Proof of Heaven, and he was brain dead for I don't know how long, a long time. They didn't expect him to live. And he left us with this message that I'd like to leave with you, because the question is, if our personal will is not significant, then what is significant? What is important? And that is that the idea that the message, and that is that we are loved unconditionally, that we cannot mess up, and that everything will be okay. And I'd like to add to that thought with a quote from the best exotic Marigold Hotel. If you haven't heard this quote, because I think it sums it all up, and that is, everything will be all right in the end. If it's not all right, then it's not yet the end. Thank you very much.